session 2 was squirrel, and I'm going to work on some rope desensitizing and petting further back on him. I might switch out his halter too. Just going to show you guys a little bit of our session today. So the rope desensitizing I've done with a bunch of my Mustangs, almost all of them. I want them to be good with me tossing it over their head and around behind them. He was getting a little bit nervous yesterday when I was starting to shinny this rope further back on his body. Good boy. And I think it has to do more rather than the feel of the rope with my arm doing that motion that's kind of throwing out. That's what bothers him the most. Good boy. And it doesn't necessarily matter how many times you miss, good boy, because all it is just working more and more on desensitizing and touching around them. I think it's a little bit caught, good boy, on that bit on the other side. Okay. So right now for him, we're going to keep repeating that exercise until the rope behind him becomes a little less scary. Sometimes what I do is put on a set of basically both long lines. That way when they turn, if they're panicking about it touching their hind end, they go to turn fast, there's still going to be a rope touching the hind end. It's just going to be coming from the other side. The other thing I might spend some time working on with him after I toss it this time is wrapping that lunge line or lunge whip around the hind end a little bit more. That was a better reaction. The reason I had to keep blocking him was because if he ended up spooking and turning into me, it wouldn't have been the best situation for either one of us. This horse also has a little bit of an issue you saw yesterday with blocking. When I would touch this side over here with his mouth, he'd be wanting to kind of block me out. This is already heaps better with him keeping his head straight. Good boy. Good. So then to help with a little more prep for that, I'm going to take that lunge whip and have it toss over his hind end, around the hind end, and this also helps me work on some of the pressure with his face too, especially since he doesn't love this. Good, and I always want to make sure I'm being fair with my releases, so if he stands for a couple of them and is kind of processing, I want to release and let him know that he's picking the right answers. Good boy. Good boy. Good. Good boy. Good. Everything you do with these guys, you've heard me say it before, you want to make sure you do on both sides of them. So that information doesn't necessarily transfer over. Boy. So the reason that I release rope there rather than sitting on the end of it when he's spooking is because if you have constant pressure on their head and you're not a stable thing like a post or whatnot, they will learn to just take that weight and run and pull with it and drag and get heavier to the pressure. So if I can put slack in that rope as they are spooking or moving away, it gives a little bit of that jerking response when they come back to me. So for his session today, I'm just going to keep working on that rope toss and working to cut further and further back on his body, hopefully get a few more kind of tests of him spooking and going to the side and then coming back to pressure, because I think that's one of the biggest things I want to help him achieve, is how to kind of regulate his emotions instead of fully spooking away and committing to exiting. He sticks with me, and if for some reason he does completely exit and move to the side, he knows to come back, not just continue to rip this rope out of my hand. Today we are working on a few of the things we did yesterday. I'm going to voice this over and let you guys know how these exercises are helping him and how specifically they are targeting the bolting issue.
Starting off with just touching him with the stick and some desensitizing, he was a little bit worried, so I'll go back and forth between working on the sensitizing and desensitizing, but I think my goal here is to start on one of our sending exercises. With this guy, once he figures out that he can stand still and specifically what the stick is being used for at that time, he's usually pretty good. So now he's kind of in the desensitizing mode and figuring out that I am sending energy through it right now. I stay really quiet with my body, I give him body language cues to send off, and I reinforce with the stick. The goal here is to teach him that he can walk away or alongside of me in that sending position and not completely bolt off. And if I bump up on that rope, he faces up to me. I don't know if you remember the first video, but he is already a lot softer in this. I did change his halter out the day before when his owners were here, kind of watching his sessions. Good, and then I'm also bumping it up to the trot, because sometimes when you start to add speed with these guys, that's when things get a little hairy and they kind of forget what they are doing, where their feet are, how to respond to that lead rope pressure. I really like, even right there when he turned to the side, there was a tiny bump on that lead rope and he responded to it. I don't want them to feel like they can't move their feet. That's when more dangerous things happen, when they go into that freeze state, because they just let everything build up. And then when it gets to be too much, they usually explode or move in a more dangerous way. So if I can teach him to move forward with his feet and let him know he can have distance like what he has right now when he gets nervous. But I really like this exercise for them, between disengaging the hindquarters, letting them keep that distance, and teaching them how to respond at a distance from me. Like here, when he's getting nervous, instead of turning and bolting off, I really like that he faced up again. So I gave him a second to think about it, not just pushed him immediately back into it. Again, there was an easy opportunity for him to kind of turn to the left and take it and take that rope right across his neck, but he decided to stick with me. So I try to always reward and get really soft, at least for a second or two, when they decide to stay instead of push out.
That's very nice. Good job.
Like right there, he started to bend out to the side, but he did well. Then we go back into some of the desensitizing after just doing some of the sensitizing with the stick, working on rubbing down those legs. I always try to touch all parts of the body with the stick first before I go there with my hand, in case there is a sensitive area. I know which area is most sensitive. And then here, even just with that simple approach, he's getting a little bit worried on that side. So I stick there, kind of slow down where I'm at, add some movement through my arm, and then touch him and let him know he's all right. There's a lick and a chew. So sometimes when you go into these exercises where there's more movement and then you go down to the slower movement, they start to respond and think energy is going through everything. So it might take a time or two of reaching out and touching for him to settle and understand the difference again. It's kind of this scale where you're creating sensitivity and then dullness, and it's a ongoing battle of finding that middle ground. So I pet them for a while on the off side, and then I like to break up their feet and move them around. So I'm going to this side. And again, a little hesitation on the touch, but it's always better to not act like I'm hesitating myself and be not overly confident in my actions, but just kind of move along to it. What I'm feeling right here is he has two identical bumps on his shoulders. They kind of feel like bone, but they're on each side of him. It's really odd. It's like the upper shoulder. I'll kind of point out what area I'm talking about. It's right there, wherever I keep touching and feeling over. So I spend some time with that, trying to see if it's sensitive at all, and then I noticed it was on the other side too. But my goal here is working on petting down those legs. So after the petting, I go back into a desensitizing exercise. I just like to mix it up with them. Don't let their feet stay still for too long, because then that's how they can get into that freeze state. But working with that rope, kind of getting all around him, and I think I showed, it might have been the video that started this video from 2 days prior, him giving and turning around the hind end. So he's still obviously touchy when it's up on the high end of his rear, but we have a much better reaction when it gets lower. This has just been an easy exercise I've kind of been practicing every day with him. So getting him to give to that pressure, not panic quite as much. I like that he's not overly reactive when it's just above his hocks. And there, good opportunity for him to try to bolt or get really nervous, but he softened right away and came back in, which is really nice. The more that I can toss this rope over, the better. It's just getting him more and more relaxed with it, letting him know that my arm, especially when it's moving in that kind of fast motion, isn't necessarily asking him to move or saying anything to him. Good, much better reaction.
Good job.
I did a few more tosses over the hind end, and this one he seemed to react a little bit more to. Did not love it going up over him, but again, the goal is that he comes back towards me. He's definitely allowed to move his feet and let me know when he's not loving something, when something's still scary to him, but he can't completely exit stage left and run out and take the rope and my arm with him. So all the responses I'm getting here, I really like, where he's coming back to me, getting put under a little pressure while his feet are moving. And this is where he starts to get smart. He's like, okay, if I turn around, the rope doesn't even have to touch my hind end. And they start to figure that out sometimes. So that's where you start to do the long lining with them, where if they turn too fast, they're still going to have that rope touching their hip. A little work with the rope, and now we're going to some of the desensitizing things. So some basic jumping and just dropping of my knees, just to add some more movement to my body, letting him know that I am all right. I, in fact, was not possessed. And sometimes I jump too. So now the goal is to get him to come forward. So usually when there is a scary object or something scary happening, if I can teach that horse to walk towards it while moving it away, it can help build their confidence some. It makes them feel like they are pushing it or asking it to move. It's the same thing when I introduce a tarp, well, movement with a tarp. I'll be dragging it and having them walk behind it. That way, as they're moving forward, the tarp is moving away from them. So same thing here, where I'm jumping, going backwards. That way he feels like he can kind of close that gap and get closer. His cute little cautious steps. And we end our session again with a little bit of desensitizing to that rope. So I'm going to just chuck it at him, he's thinking movement right then. So this is where he's trying really hard to understand if I'm wanting him to move off the energy or relax from the object. And he's doing his best to kind of figure out the difference in my body language between those two options. That's about the end of this session, and I will give you guys maybe 1 or 2 more updates on this horse, but I feel like we're making good progress on how he can respond to energy.